My name is Christina Jackson, and I am the Executive Director of Washington Council of Lawyers. I am thrilled to see some new faces in the audience for this panel, so welcome. You saw in the scroll a couple things. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping. We have an additional upcoming panel next Thursday. We're going to be talking about civil rights and civil liberties and immigration and human rights. That will be next Thursday at noon. That will wrap up our summer forum, but stay tuned to both social media and our blog post. You'll see some recaps, some additional resources, and some ways to move forward in your action items. In addition, speaking of ways to get involved, if you take a look at our upcoming events on our website, you're going to see several opportunities to attend programming for free as a law student. You will also see an opportunity to volunteer at the DC Bar Pro Bono Center's Brief Advice and Referral Clinic. We staff that quarterly, and our turn is coming up in August. So you'll see some opportunities to volunteer there. In addition, if you'd like to be part of this community and take advantage of member pricing, the Public Interest Jobs Clearinghouse, etc., you'll find information on how to join on our website. It is only $25 for law students, and I believe it is a great value. I think people would agree. I see some nodding heads, so I would check that out if I were you. I do want to remind folks that any panels that have government lawyers, they are participating in their individual capacity. I will continue to remind folks, but I do need to say that at the top of the hour. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We will get to those at the end of our discussion. Or if you would like to ask your question yourself, just raise your hand and I will make sure to unmute you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Jen Massey, who is the Pro Bono Director at Children's Law Center. Take it away, Jen.
Great. Thank you so much, Christina. Thank you all for being here today. My name is Jen Massey. As Christina said, I'm the Pro Bono Director at Children's Law Center. I'm also happily on the board of Washington Council of Lawyers and excited for everyone to attend today's event, our Poverty Law panel. Before I share a little bit more about myself and my organization and turn it over to our panelists to say a little bit about themselves and their work, I'd like to go ahead and have a couple of poll questions of the audience. So I know people are entering things into the chat, and so we want to ask just a couple of other questions. So our first question is going to be about where everyone is. So we're going to launch that first one, and if you can go ahead and respond to that, it should appear on your screen. Please tell us where you're joining from today. Looks like the Mid-Atlantic might be edging out the South just a little bit. The numbers are changing.
We got 100% participation. That is so exciting.
Everyone's locked in and engaged. That's fantastic. Okay, excellent. We can go ahead and share those results just so everyone can kind of see who we have joining us today. And so it does look like those first three categories are the top: Mid-Atlantic, South, and Northeast. Okay, great. We'd next like to go ahead and just see who we have with us today. And so we're just going to do one more poll question about practice experience. So pick the category that fits you, whether you might be at a law firm, a solo practitioner, nonprofit, attorney, government, in-house legal, etc., wherever you may be in terms of law school if you're a student. And there's another category if none of those fit. Excellent. A lot of those are coming in as well.
Love this engaged audience. Look at that.
Yes, thank you so much. It looks here like there's a tie between Rising or close between Rising 2L and Rising 3L. So we do have most of the audience Rising 3L. Congratulations! Look how you're so close. Rising 2L, you're right behind. Okay, excellent. So thank you so much, everyone, for for completing both of those poll questions. And thank you for adding additional notes in the chat of who is here today. Did those appear on the screen to be shared, Christina? I'm not sure if I'm just seeing them. But
They did, yep.
perfect. Okay, so I'm going to X out of that box for myself. Well, thank you. It's just great to know who is with us today. We welcome everyone, and you're going to be hearing us talk about pro bono and public interest locally and nationally. And so there's a little bit of something for everyone. And so I'm excited to touch on, there are lots of areas that cover poverty law. What does that mean? What practice areas are we talking about? We're going to talk about a cross section today that are some, but not all. We're going to touch on, representing domestic violence survivors, seniors, children. We'll talk about, what opportunities exist for doing this work, a career path for public interest, as well as being a pro bono volunteer. This is what we're all about, and we do this work together. So whether you are working at a legal services provider like some of our panelists or at a law firm, like one of our panelists, there is a lot of opportunity to work toward the issues of poverty law. You're going to hear us also talk today about the intersection between poverty law practice areas, the work that we're all doing, and racial justice. You're going to hear about the intersection with access to justice, and hopefully leave off and take home with you some tips for closing thoughts from all of us. So I will kick off introductions and say just a little bit more about myself and my organization before turning it over to our amazing panelists today. So again, I'm the pro bono director at Children's Law Center. We are in Washington, D.C., practicing in the areas of family, health, and education. So we are serving predominantly Black and Brown children in the District of Columbia. Our work is in the family law space, serving families in the foster care system, abuse and neglect matters, as well as families who are in contested custody cases. We will serve as best interest attorneys for children in both of those systems. In those roles, we are advocating for the best interest of the child, whatever the particular case may be about. We also represent a lot of grandparents, third-party caregivers of children in custody cases as well. Children's Law Center also has a medical legal partnership. So some of my colleagues, and one of my colleagues who unfortunately was not able to make it today, Tracy Goodman, leads our medical legal partnership at Children's Law Center and has been doing so for over 20 years. She and some other colleagues are working very closely with pediatricians and other health professionals at Children's National, Unity, and Mary Center. And so we are working hand in hand with the medical folks who are serving families in the city. They are seeing health harming needs that really have a space for lawyers to address. So of course, the medical professionals are providing medical care, but at instances where conditions in someone's home is actually exacerbating the health need, sometimes families need lawyers to be able to resolve those matters through housing conditions, for example. It might also be a child with a disability who's in need of services for special education in school. So family, health, and education are the three main areas of our work. We're striving to ensure that each child in DC can grow up and thrive with stability in those areas. And we're working hard against the systems of oppression and poverty and trauma that are getting in the way of success for DC kids and families. With respect to my colleagues, I'm going to stop there and just turn it over to Harmony Jones, Pro Bono Counsel at Steptoe.
Thank you so much, Jen. I am excited to be here today. I love talking to law students and young lawyers. Like Jen said, my name is Harmony Jones. I am Pro Bono Counsel at the law firm of Steptoe. Prior to that, I was in legal services. So I was at Legal Aid Society in DC and Neighborhood Legal Services Program in DC, providing direct representation to clients in the areas of public benefits, some housing, some family law. And, when I started out of law school, I was a law clerk, and then I was a, summer associate at a couple of different firms. I was an intern at the Public Defender Service, and then a pro bono fellow at a law firm, and then a commercial litigation associate at a law firm. And I just mentioned all these is because when I was in law school, I was really trying to think, when am I going to be? A public interest lawyer, a law firm lawyer, a government lawyer? And I've been very privileged, and I've seen this very often. I don't think that you have to pick. No matter where you are, you can always give back, and there are always people that are in need of representation. that you can help. And so I've been privileged to do that. And I often encourage students to do that no matter where they are throughout their career, to think of themselves as a public interest lawyer in part, because there's such a need and we can really, really make a difference. And now in my role as a really amazing.
Harmony, I think I may have lost part of your audio.
Oh no, can you hear it now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, now.
Okay. So I was just saying, like, as pro bono counsel, I oversee the pro bono program of the firm. I do some direct representation in areas that I have experience in, so public benefits and housing, and then some civil rights, criminal defense, immigration work. So that's a great thing about doing pro bono law firm. You can really do anything that you're interested in within reason to serve the community. We work with a lot of the organizations represented here today. And then, one of my favorite parts about the job is that I get to see what, our lawyers are passionate about, what our summer associates are passionate about, what your experiences are, and match you with pro bono opportunities in the community. So that makes me excited.
Thank you, Harmony. That's great. And so Sebastian, if you can introduce yourself, and then Aida after that. Thank you so much.
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. My name is Sebastian. I'm a litigation attorney with AARP Foundation. We focus on impact litigation in courts, state and federal, across the country to combat senior poverty and protect seniors' rights. Previously, I was a legal services attorney with Legal Counsel for the Elderly, where I focused on representing low-income seniors in housing litigation and discrimination. That includes reasonable accommodations, eviction defense, real on-the-ground law. So I'm happy to be joining the panel. And I think I don't want to build too much on Harmony's thoughts, but I agree with everything she said.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. My name is Aida Vendel and I am the co-legal director here at DC Volunteer Lawyers Project. At DC Volunteer Lawyers Project, I oversee all of our legal services. DC Volunteer Lawyers Project mainly works with pro bono attorneys. So I really love what Harmony said, that you don't have to choose. You can, right, work at a legal organization where you are providing pro bono services full-time to your direct clients, but we have so many volunteer attorneys at DCVLP who work in so many different areas of the law. They work in law firms, they work in government agencies, they're retired, they're professors. There are so many ways that someone can really give back to the community and work in public interest, especially here at DCVLP. That's what we do. We train pro bono attorneys and we also co-counsel with them. We represent, we have 3 practice areas. We have our domestic violence practice area, we have our child advocacy practice area, and then we have our immigration. Under our domestic violence practice area, we have pro bono attorneys representing survivors of domestic violence. And we are at court with survivors, helping them obtain civil protection orders. We also help them get custody and divorce. Our child advocacy practice, that's similar that what Children's Law Center does, is that we are assigned to cases where we provide the court with best interest recommendations for children. And then our immigration practice, we have, again, pro bono attorneys, either assisting clients at clinic, providing them with free legal advice at clinics, or assisting them in certain applications. Prior to working at DC Volunteer Lawyers Project, I was at the Children's Law Center, where Jen Massey works as well. I really enjoyed working there. I was there for about 3.5 years, representing children in abuse and neglect cases. Prior to that, I worked at IUDA, and I was there for 2 years, and I was a staff attorney in the Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault Unit. And I'm really proud to say I went to UDC David A. Clark School of Law, which really helps their law students get into public interest work. So I'm really excited to be here. That's a little bit about myself. Yeah, thank you, Jen.
Thank you. There is a robust and close-knit community, so you'll hear us talk about knowing each other and working with each other. We used to work with each other, and so it's kind of a cool thing here, and I know that exists across the country and in various cities and places. And so it's one of those things that I think makes Washington Council of Lawyers a really special place to be, that intersection of pro bono and public interest, and, you know, different types of organizations coming together. And whether you're at a law firm or you're full-time at a legal services organization, there's so much opportunity, and it's great collaboration to serve the community, to meet the goals that we have. And so you've heard from some of us just now, different opportunities in public interest and pro bono. I'll see if my panelists have anything to add or that they would like to add, but I'll note in terms of career opportunities for public interest at Children's Law Center, we have ongoing postings for internships for undergraduates. We have ongoing postings for law clerkships for law students. And so those are things you can access on the career page of our website. We welcome folks to apply and spend a semester with us, whether it is the fall or spring or summer. Those are the timeframes. It's a great opportunity to observe. It's a great opportunity to engage and do some of the work, supporting us do some of the work. There's just a lot to learn by doing and observing, and, you know, getting out to see clients, or, you know, doing interviews, being at the courthouse, whatever the case might be. It's a great experience to kind of assess what might be a good fit for you, something that you may be interested in, and a great part of the path if you are interested in doing public interest work full time. And then with respect to doing pro bono, you know, there are lots of ways to engage. If you are thinking about going to a law firm, you know, you can engage with folks like Harmony and ask questions about what the pro bono program looks like. What are the opportunities there? Because it is, as she's already said, a nice way to explore various types of practice areas. And there are just tons of different ways to do that. So I just pause and see anything maybe to add about public interest opportunities or pro bono opportunities. Sebastian, I'll turn to you.
Sure. So to echo your point, we also do have an internship and fellowship program with AARP Foundation. If you want to, they're paid positions, but they're not necessarily volunteer. But as far as in DC proper, the advice and referral clinic through the DC Bar Pro Bono Center is a great place to start. It's non-committal. You can kind of go one Saturday morning and with a supervising attorney give legal advice on different civil law issues. As far as taking on a bigger case, I know Legal Counsel for the Elderly has a volunteer program that you can go in and you could work their hotline, for example, where seniors call in with different legal issues. And again, with a supervising attorney, you can provide legal advice and assistance and information sometimes. Sometimes that's all that needs to be accessed. But those two are probably the biggest ones.
And yes, and I also want to share with everyone that we do also have internships for undergrads. I really enjoy having undergrad interns at our office. Some of the things that they do for us is that they assist us in our community legal clinics. So we provide free legal advice to walk-in DC residents who need assistance in their domestic violence cases, custody, civil protection orders, and our interns really help us help when someone walks into their clinic. They help us with intakes, they give them referrals after our clinic. So if any of you I think I saw some undergrad interns in here. We do have internships for undergrads throughout the season, throughout the year. And we do also have internships for law students. Our law students really helped us during the pandemic. As you all may have heard in the news, there was a really huge hike in the amount of numbers of people who were filing civil protection orders. And so that meant that a lot of people needed help with that, especially since everything turned to remote, right? Everything now, instead of people going into the courthouse, people had to file their petitions online. And sometimes people didn't have computers, people didn't have internet at their homes. So we use law students in our internships so that we can, they were helping people file those petitions for civil protection orders. Of course, you always have an attorney who oversees that filing. If there are any legal questions, that supervising attorney will step in and give that advice to the clients. But we do have those opportunities at DC Volunteer Lawyers Project. And we also have fellowships, and everything is posted on our website as well.
And I will just add, we at Steptoe, we have a pre-law fellows program. So if you're in between undergrad and law school and you want to get an idea of what the lawyers do at a big law firm, you can apply for that. And they work very closely with our team. So that's been really helpful to us and a great experience, I think, for them as well. And of course, we also have summer associates. And throughout the summer, we are like hosting some events for people that are at other organizations this summer. So happy to share those if you want to reach out. And also just always happy. I always love meeting with law students about their careers. So if you ever want to grab coffee, I mean, I will always be happy to do that. And also talk to you about the pro bono counsel position, because that's not something I knew was even a career when I was in law school. And so to be able to combine them both, I think it's been a real privilege, and it's something that is like a growing profession. So.
Such great points. I noticed one question that came up in this discussion about remote opportunities. And so while different organizations and different offices vary in terms of what hybrid work looks like for them, I can say that there is a lot of opportunity, I believe, overall for remote opportunities. So I know at Children's Law Center, we continue to have some of our clerks and interns assist us remotely. One of the cool things in DC that happened as a result of the pandemic, a positive of the pandemic, was when, as Aida was just talking about, that shift to how do you file things, we all went remote. You know, we didn't do this before. Everyone went in person to the courthouse. Now we have WebEx for DC Superior Court. They have maintained that. And, you know, we're giving tips early. You know, Harmony just gave a great one of, didn't realize this was even a thing in law school. And so another tip is you can observe hearings at DC Superior Court. They're open to the public. They've always been open to the public unless it is a case type that is closed. For example, those foster care cases are closed, but custody, housing, you know, domestic violence, criminal, these things are open to the public. And so you can now access courtrooms on the DC Superior Court website. So in terms of having a remote experience, even if you were to intern or clerk with an organization and not be able to be present in DC, you still may be able to do some of these observations remotely because of the things that we've maintained during the pandemic. So moving away from DC and promising to fulfill what I said earlier, talking about national opportunities, I am going to kick back to Harmony. If you can share what are some similar organizations or similar ways to do pro bono or public interest work, and any of the practice areas you've had experience with across the country.
Yes, I'm happy to answer that. As pro bono counsel, I sit in DC, but we're over all the offices that the firm has, so international pro bono. And so we've had a real privilege to have relationships with similar organizations. And DC has amazing organizations. We have the opportunity to have relationships with very similar organizations that are doing great things in all the cities and even rural areas across the country. And that's one thing. I will talk a lot about the cities, but there is a real need for folks to do stuff. You know, if you're from an area that's not a city, oftentimes there's like, you know, a handful of lawyers there doing it. And we have a ton in DC. There's still need everywhere. But I will tell you, there are organizations doing it in sort of, you know, rural, you know, in the South, and that you can make a huge impact. So I would suggest lawhelp.org as one of the places you can go, and you can go to the page that says need help, and you can find anywhere in the whole country and maybe need help, but also you can offer to volunteer at any of those organizations. So that's a good starting place for, like, there's like a map and you can sort of, you know, plug in where you are and we'll show you similar organizations. Some of the ones we work closely with in New York, we do some housing condition stuff with Legal Services NYC, and they do a lot of great work. And we also work with the Legal Aid Society in NYC, and for there we do a lot of parole work. Legal Aid Society in New York does a lot of criminal stuff, but we do sort of the civil side of that. So we'll help them if they have a criminal, you know, client that needs help with public benefits and things like that. So that's a great partnership we have. In Chicago, we work closely with Legal Aid Chicago, and we do a lot of eviction stuff, clinic stuff, criminal record expungement, domestic violence. So sort of very similar to the work that you see represented here. We also work with Chicago Volunteer Legal Services in Chicago. They do a lot of family law stuff. And then in LA, we work closely with Public Counsel and Public Law Center, doing a lot of similar work, housing and stuff like that. So I would say whatever city you're in, you can just, you know, sort of do a little bit of search, look at the bar foundations, and there are definitely legal aid organizations doing really great work. And just, you know, you can get one thing.
Thank you, Harmony. Lots of great examples. And to pull out your point that it isn't just cities, there are a lot of, the need is everywhere. And so I love the suggestion about lawhelp.org. That is a great resource. And so as we know, there's a lot of information that you can find online, and that's a great place to go to just consider what is out there and explore. It's a great resource. Before moving to another question, I'm just going to see any other ads about just kind of the national other areas of work, Sebastian, on this question?
Sure. So I just want to plug Legal Services Corporation. They offer grants to nonprofit legal services across the country. Their website, lsc.gov, you could just type in your zip code and look up, who the grantee is in that area, and potentially contact them for volunteer opportunities. That's all. I just wanted to plug in that.
It's another great addition, and the magic of partnering here. It's popped up in the chat. I think either Christina or Chris has already added it there, so you can follow that link. Well, I thank you for touching on those opportunities. There really is a need everywhere. There really are opportunities everywhere. And part of it is just knowing where to look and who to find. And so Harmony already offered this before, and I think the offer stands with so many of us. Feel free to, reach out to folks who are doing this work and ask questions. There's a lot that you may not learn or hear about without engaging with others. And so we're happy to do that. And so just keep that in mind for questions today and for connecting with any of us outside of this panel. Switching gears a little bit in terms of topic, I had mentioned earlier the intersection with racial justice. And so what do we mean by racial justice when we use those words? I think we observe people use them in different ways. I think we've observed discussion around racial justice increase since earlier in 2020. We've seen different initiatives that organizations doing legal services full-time or law firms doing pro bono work have started or have amplified, in the past few years. And ultimately, I think, how pro bono and public interest lawyering intersects with racial justice is going to vary in some ways by practice area or by community, and knowing that we need to focus on who is the community we're serving, what are the needs of the clients we're serving. They're the experts in their lived experience. And so we'll talk a lot about doing this work being, trauma informed and also culturally humble, and really thinking about how we bring our legal expertise to someone who may not have the legal expertise, but certainly has the expertise of their lived experience. And that includes how they're experiencing a legal issue. And so this is a big part of doing the work in terms of how we consider how we show up, working with our clients, what our clients are bringing to us, what the goal is of our work together to be successful. And so there are lots of different layers to, I think, this conversation of how poverty law practice intersects with racial justice. And I think we've all been exploring this a bit more deeply. I think we've certainly been talking about it much more frequently, and getting more comfortable with what can be uncomfortable conversations. But as we're talking about the intersection of racism and poverty, I'll kick off by saying we do see this at Children's Law Center. If my colleague Tracy were here, she would certainly be talking to you today about the health inequities that we see. So when I earlier mentioned our medical legal partnership, that is a place where we see drastic health inequities. And we know that we're really looking at a racial inequity. We know that we are thinking about, as a concrete example, I'll just share, because we are working with families in these housing conditions cases. And so one of the most common and prevalent health needs of the children in these matters is asthma. And so in DC, for children who are living in Ward 7 or 8, and that is where our clients are living on low or no incomes, a child with asthma, and these are predominantly Black communities east of the Anacostia River, I should say, in DC. A child with asthma in those wards is 20 times more likely to go to the emergency department for asthma than a child living in a wealthier neighborhood in Ward 3. This is the data and statistics that we just see. Children's National Hospital in DC sees 1% of all emergency room visits for asthma in the nation. which is just incredible. And so the numbers really speak for themselves, knowing that this asthma disparity is tied to, health inequity and racial disparities and the underpinnings of, the housing system. We see this, of course, show up in education systems as well. Our work in terms of the preschool to prison pipeline that we see play out and impacting families and students of color, and also our work in the child welfare system and just the racist underpinnings of that system and the history of separating Black families. And so we see the intersection there, and we are diving deeper into our work, researching more of that history, thinking about innovative legal strategies, things that maybe we haven't been saying or including in our advocacy that we've overlooked and need to chip further and further away at systems of oppression. And so there's much work to be done. I think there's been increased discussion in this area, but I want to hear from our panelists on this topic. And so when you're thinking about pro bono service and public interest lawyering intersecting with racial justice in your practice area, Sebastian, I'll go to you first. How would you answer that question for our audience today?
Well, it's a big question. I think there is definitely a correlation there. I mean, at Legal Counsel for the Elderly, where I represented low-income seniors in the district, over 90% of my clients over that 5-year span were Black or Brown residents. There is, you sort of have to acknowledge that there is this association with why is poverty intersecting with Black and Brown communities, and also why are these communities not able to find legal services or access to justice elsewhere? Why are they coming to our organization? So I think these are systemic questions you have to ask yourself when representing these low-income communities, but also you need to sort of meet them where they're at. As far as client-centered lawyering, you have to understand the dynamics of those communities. For example, I had a client who was basically living off of Social Security retirement benefits, and she was supporting her son who had a disability, who was in his 50s, her granddaughter who was in her 20s, and her great-granddaughter who was just under a year old. And because of their life circumstance, she was kind of the matriarch of that household and in charge of all the bills and taking care of everyone. And so it's not uncommon to have that sort of dynamic where even though there are adults living in the household, they're all living together because poverty prevents them from getting independent living spaces. So I think it's important to sort of acknowledge that these systems are incorporated with racial justice. It's not just a matter of the laws being a certain way. These institutions definitely bleed into the court, especially in legal services.
Harmony?
Yes, I'd be happy to add. I totally agree with that, Sebastian. We see racial inequalities basically in every area of poverty law that we practice. We see it in housing and public benefits and criminal justice and immigration. And the reality of the situation is those in need of services are overwhelmingly people and communities of color in DC. And we see disproportionate numbers sort of nationwide. But I think it's important to understand what Sebastian was saying, the context for these problems. There are areas of the law that are deeply influenced by the systematic racism we've seen throughout our history. And so just taking a minute to think about why we are in that situation, if we, Sebastian mentioned housing law, we have a history of having racism in our national housing policy. And it's been enacted by laws, so we need to undo some of that. And you can look back and you see there are communities that were redlined, and it was impossible for Black middle-class families to buy, homes in these areas. And today they've done some work, and you can sort of see those redlined areas overlap with eviction maps. We also talk about education in the city, and that's something that I feel very strongly about. I know Children's Law Center does a lot of that work. They could have helped if I think my family's trajectory would have been different if my father grew up in DC in Anacostia, He graduated from Ballou High School, a school in Southeast, and he got his diploma, but no one seemed to recognize or care that he needed special education services. So when he graduated, he could not read or write. That had a lasting effect on the sort of economic status of, there were 7 kids in my family, of how he could provide for them. Sadly, he ended up learning to read or write in jail, in the criminal justice system. So just seeing the overlap of not having the education. And then in contrast, I have a diverse family. And so my mom, she came from a, white background, a Jewish family, and she grew less than, it's like 30 minutes away to one of the best high schools in the country, Bethesda Chevy Chase. And what a difference that education can make in your life, and what a hand racial discrimination plays in that, and to where we are today. So just kind of thinking about the context of that and how we can help undo some of that. It's a lot of work to do, but I feel like by providing services and trying to do what we can as lawyers with this privilege, we can make a real difference. And housing law is something that it's pretty stark. There was a recent study by Princeton Eviction Lab, and it was saying for every they did a study, and there was 40 Black renters for every 100 white renters in these counties, but that for every 100 eviction filings, there was 80 eviction filings were for Black renters. And so just seeing that disproportionate effect. In DC, there was a study in Ward 2 has the lowest poverty rates, and fewer than 3 out of 100 renter households received eviction filings. By contrast, 25 out of every 100 renters in Ward 7 or 8. So, and those were predominantly Black and brown renters. So just thinking about the reality of racial justice, who can afford to live in this city as we come in as lawyers and live in this city, and what we can do to really sort of try and make a difference and undo some of the racial justice, systematic inequality that exists. And I think we do have a responsibility with the privilege of being lawyers to do what we can.
Thank you so much for those responses. So many great points there. And I think this concept of responsibility as lawyers, and I was talking about, our legal expertise, I reflect a lot on our work and the need for us to be there in the first place. So if it's, a housing conditions case, as going back to that example again, we'll see so many intakes where, again, this child with asthma is going to the emergency room, going to the doctor frequently, missing school, the parents missing work, sometimes at risk or actually does lose their job as a result. And there's this huge ripple effect. And we see instances where there are doctors who are treating that child, writing letters about things in the home that are contributing to the child's health, that are health harming and in need of repair. And all of the intakes that come to us are parents who are advocating for their children and are speaking up, and they know their circumstance best. And yet that has not resulted in, all of the cases that are coming to us in remediating what's happening in the home. And so there's a place for lawyers to come in and we make a real big difference. So I have these mixed feelings of us being needed in the first place because families are their best advocates. But the reality is that lawyers do make a difference. And so there is learning and just the practice that we have in these different areas. If you do it pro bono, you're going to be trained, you're going to have some type of support, whether it's a co-counseling model, like Aida mentioned at DC Volunteer Lawyers Project, or being mentored by experienced attorneys at a legal services organization like CLC or others. There's going to be support there. And so you're going to have a lot of tools in your legal toolkit or toolbox. And it can be really, really powerful. And so how do we use them to Harmony's point? And where is that responsibility and privilege, an opportunity to really address these inequities, these systems of oppression? And I would add to the conversation too, just being a lawyer in the system, the court system. If we, think about just where various tenets of white supremacy culture are baked in to the laws that are created, to the practice in the courthouse. You'll certainly hear me chime in, but I'll hear from our panelists next about access to justice and the need for attorneys to represent clients. So there's a lot of overlap with, these topics that we're discussing today. And so when we think about that responsibility piece, again, that Harmony just mentioned, and where we can use our legal expertise to serve families, despite the complications that I'm sharing I have with us being needed in the first place, I want to go to Aida for this next question about access to justice. So can you tell us, when you think about pro bono service, public interest lawyering, how does that advance access to justice and in any of the practice areas at DCVLP, be it immigration, child custody, or domestic violence?
Yeah, so I really see public interest work as that bridge that can help sort of, I don't want to say correct, but assist in situations like what Harmony was speaking about, where a person who may not have gotten the education that they needed in high school, and now they're interacting with the judicial system. How difficult can that be, right? As lawyers, if any of you, I see some undergrad, but some of you are in law school, right? You're reading these statutes, you're reading these codes, these case law, it's so difficult. Imagine someone going in there, a pro se person, trying to understand what their rights are. And maybe they're facing someone who, like a landlord who has an attorney, who files a summary judgment motion. How can someone really understand that? So I think that public interest really comes in and helps bridge that gap and helps give people access to justice, be able to stay in their homes, be able to have protections against abusers. So I actually sit on a commission, it's called DC Access to Justice, and they primarily focus on improving other people's abilities to be able to get legal services. They have a report, and that report listed that 75 to 80% of litigants or people in courthouse are pro se in high stake litigation. And that is, really alarming, especially when so many injustices, as you all see, is going on in the world. So I think it's really important for people to really value public interest work, whether, like I said earlier, whether it's you choosing a career where you are giving back to the community, bridging that gap as part of direct legal services, or you do some pro bono work to assist with that. And I want to talk a little bit about sort of the different ways that public interest work can help someone in their case. So as you know, there's so many different ways. One of them could be representing someone in court, right? That's providing full representation. You sign a retainer with that person, you help them strategize, you collect evidence, you go to court, and you advocate for them in front of a judge. But there are so many other ways. In DC, there's also, and I'm sure in other jurisdictions, but something that we do often at DCVLP is limited representation. So we often have someone, let's say, coming to our legal clinic on a Wednesday, and they say that they have trial on a Monday. Now, we can't find a pro bono attorney that quickly, but something that we can do is we can do a limited representation to sit down with them and help them organize the documents that they have, or maybe we can even sit down and help them make an argument to ask for a continuance to get an attorney. But if that is not an option for them, one other way that we can help is helping them understand the law, sitting down with them, telling them, this is what you can bring in. These are the witnesses. This is the way that I would suggest that you do that. We can also help them by filing documents in a limited rep capacity. There's so many other ways that instead of also just representing someone or giving someone advice, there's also administrative things that can help as far as assisting nonprofit organizations. As you can imagine, many nonprofit organizations don't have the wealth of funding that really it should be there. But pro bono attorneys also can assist in so many other ways, doing research for the organization. We have pro bono counsel who provide advice on ethical issues that come up, creating policies within organizations to help them be able to continue to provide services to the community. So I wanted to talk about that, especially after the pandemic. I've talked about that earlier, but there are so many ways that a pro bono attorney or a public interest lawyer can make a difference in someone's lives, especially now that everything is remote. We have clients who don't have Wi-Fi at home, who don't have capacity or or maybe they don't have daycare options, right? And so they need to be somewhere where they're able to participate in their case. So our pro bono attorneys also have clients come into our office. We have conference rooms, we have tablets that they can use, we have computers. We're really setting them up for success. We're helping them present the best case that they can because they're really at a disadvantage to so many other people. And speaking specifically with domestic violence survivors, often the abusers are the ones who are controlling much of the finances. They are the ones who are usually able to pay for that lawyer to represent them in that high stakes custody case. And so where does that survivor go other than either a nonprofit organization or with the help of a pro bono attorney? So it really, really makes a difference. And that's, one of the reasons I'm really excited to be here is to show you all that in so many different capacities, a pro bono attorney, public interest lawyer really makes that difference and allows that person to have more access to that justice system that they would not have without that attorney.
Yeah, I completely agree. I just want to add in quickly, just during my time at Legal Aid Society and Neighborhood Legal Services, I did a lot of intake and I loved doing it because it was in the community and people could walk in and just, sort of tell us about their life and what they needed help with. But it was also one of the hardest parts of my jobs because there were literally thousands of clients that we had to turn away, every year, and all of them deserve representation. And so oftentimes, they would say, well, I'm sorry, this is, really compelling, but all of our staff attorneys are at capacity. And we're just not able to help you. And that was just so disheartening. And I think as a pro bono attorney, now that I'm on this side and able to sort of hopefully fill in that gap in a little way, so that if you are able to take one or two of those clients that are getting, that won't be able to have help otherwise are just completely without any legal representation, you can make a huge difference. And so I think that's a great way that we can work together with these organizations. And oftentimes I'll come to lawyers and they say, well, I've never done a housing case before, but oftentimes the pro se client has never been to housing court before, and to have an advocate by their side, even if this is the first time you're doing it, you will have mentoring and training. But it also can make a huge difference. You'd be surprised at the simple, like I'll sit in housing court, this is pre-pandemic, and just sort of watch people come up and you want to yell, oh, wait a minute, you have rights. You do not have to move out because you owe $1,000 and the landlord's attorney is standing there, like just, sort of checking this like parade of people coming before them. Like you can stay there. You don't have to just because you need to go back to work or you don't have childcare, just agree to whatever the other side is saying. So just informing people of their rights and letting them know that you're standing there beside them, I think is huge.
Yeah, if I could just add one thing onto Harmony's point, I think everyone is equal under the law, but in actually enforcing your rights or litigating or defending yourself in court, it's not equal at all. In landlord-tenant court in DC, over 90% of tenants are pro se, whereas it's the flip side, over 90% of landlords have an attorney representing them. And as far as DC, it's very tenant friendly. They have a lot of tenant and housing rights. Every lease that you enter into in DC, you're supposed to get the tenant bill of rights with it. It outlines sort of how tenant friendly DC really is. But to Harmony's point, what good is that if you don't know how to enforce those rights or exercise those rights in court? What good is that if you're just representing yourself and you can't navigate that system and you're just waiving all those rights at the first initial hearing? And so that's why it's important to have pro bono, whether it's to give legal advice, legal information, or to represent them in court, to be able to sort of make sure that they are exercising all their rights under the law.
Thank you all. Those are all such great points, and pulling out a few pieces, I think Aida really kicked it off talking about a spectrum of ways that pro bono and public interest service can increase access to justice. And so I know when we talk about folks who are interested in doing pro bono, this is really compelling. I'm hearing Harmony talk about what's happening in, this housing courtroom and Sebastian's statistics. Those are really compelling, but there may be reservations about taking on a full case or, just a time constraint that doesn't allow you to do that. And the reality is that there are other bite-sized opportunities. There are pathways to sort of trying something out a little bit, whether it is a clinic opportunity or a limited representation. And there is a lot of pro bono support to the legal services organizations themselves. We are always at capacity in the way that Harmony was describing in her prior work experience. And so we can use the help, and maybe it looks like research. There is the law firm Anti-Racism Alliance as one of those initiatives through the law firm community since 2020. And currently right now, I've got a few projects that are assigned out to summer associates who are really digging into research that's going to support us moving forward in our work together. And it's going to be really meaningful and impactful. And so there are lots of different types of opportunities and ways to address access to justice, whether it is obviously doing the public interest work full time or doing some type of pro bono support. In terms of those statistics, I'll also just add in that we see the same in family law. So I oversee a team of attorneys practicing in the domestic relations branch at Children's Law Center. Anyone that's ever interested in handling a custody matter, representing a child's best interest in a contested custody dispute, my office and Aida's office are really the two that the court goes to, because 83 to 93% of litigants, and that's a fairly recent statistic from the Access to Justice Commission that Aida also referenced, are unrepresented in those family law matters. And so in issues of child custody and what relationship a child is going to have or not have with his or her or their parents is pretty impactful, and that is something that, having more attorneys in those matters can help ensure that there is a determination about a child's custody that's in that child's best interest. So the need is great. The opportunities are plenty. I'm noticing where we are in the time. We want to be able to answer some questions and engage with you all. We have until 1:15. We're also happy to build in a little break for those of you going on to the next session or next meeting of your day. But I want to stop here and just ask for one closing remark from each of our panelists. What's a tip that you would give our attendees today to support incorporating pro bono and public interest work in their professional careers, or just anything on topic for today that you'd like to leave them with? I will start with Sebastian.
Sure. So I'll end with a call to action. As attorneys, we have the training and skills necessary to navigate the legal system, whereas those who cannot afford an attorney or don't have access to that legal information do not. I think it's a duty for and a responsibility for any attorney to assist somebody who cannot afford legal services. That can look like, drafting a will. Most people can't draft their own wills. That can be staffing a legal hotline, or you can build up to it. You can get to the point where you are taking on a full pro bono case in Superior Court or elsewhere. So I think it's more than just trying to fill in this gap of access to justice. I think it's a responsibility that every attorney should contribute to try to completely eradicate this issue.
Aida?
Yeah, one tip I always give the interns here at DCVLP is don't be scared to reach out to attorneys. As much as all attorneys who do public interest work love to help the community, we also love to mentor other attorneys or rising law students who want to be attorneys to just talk about the profession. And I also want to say that really talking to someone and maybe shadowing them. Jen talked earlier about observing some hearings. Do that as much as you can, because public interest work is hard. You want to try to pick the right maybe practice area or issue. It's not for everyone, right? There are certain topic areas. For me, immigration is very close to my heart. It is not an area that I can personally work in, right? It's happened in my family, and I know other people that motivates them to push forward. For me, it wasn't the case, but I found another way that I can give back. So I would really encourage everyone to reach out to attorneys, reach out to to us, wherever you're interning, and really understand what does it feel like to give back in that space. Can I handle that? So that's what I would suggest.
Yeah, Really good point. I totally agree. Like I said, I'm always happy to talk to folks. I also, I think I shared this in the beginning, but just not sort of limiting your career and thinking, okay, I'm going to go. I was thinking I have these loans. I'm either going to go to public interest and do something I'm really passionate about, make a difference, or go to a law firm and pay off the loans. I've been very blessed to be able to do both. And I think you can do that too, no matter where you are in your career. Always think about what you can do to give back. We all always, even as law students, I think you can make a huge difference. I clerk for a judge who has been a lifelong mentor. That's another tip. But he always said, "To whom much is given, much is required." And I think we all, even if you don't realize to have this like education, we are given a lot. And I think just always giving back in any way that you can, regardless of where you are in your career. And you'd be amazed at where you sort of end up in your career and the connections you make just by being ready to give back to the community. And like I was saying, like I think always reaching out to folks. I'm always happy to meet with folks and mentor folks. And I encourage you to do the same. There's always someone coming behind you that you can give back to as well.
Thank you all for those great tips. There's so much work to be done, especially when we were discussing just where racial justice intersects with poverty law. There's so much work to be done. And so I really hear and appreciate and join in Sebastian's call to action. And that is really real. I also think Aida's tip about checking in with yourself about what works for you is super meaningful. I think anytime I'm matching a pro bono case with a volunteer, it gets very personal. Is this something that really triggers something in you and that makes it a good fit, or it triggers something in you and it's not, and we want to find something that is going to work. And fortunately, the opportunities are so varied that there's something out there, I truly believe, for everyone. And being open to that, to Harmony's point, open to how it may change, how you can experience different types of pro bono and public interest lawyering. I'll close by adding a note about money, something that can also be added to the list of uncomfortable discussions that we hope to get better at. It may be very early for you to be thinking about, if you're in law school now or undergrad, thinking about financial planning as part of your career, but I would encourage you to do so because ultimately access to justice requires funding it. So we need the funding for legal services, attorneys, and professionals who are choosing to do this full time. We need the support to keep the lights on, literally. And so how do we do that? What does that look like for anyone? It's going to be very individualized, but I think thinking early about charitable giving and what that might look like for you, and considering that financial planning is just a smart part of planning your professional career. I encourage you to think about that. It's certainly a way to support the work, and also a need for these great communities who are doing their best to serve incredible residents in DC, as you're hearing us talk specifically today, and across our country. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And thank you again to Harmony, Aida, and Sebastian for the wonderful conversation. We are ready to take questions with our remaining time. And so I'll pause and see where Christina might have us start.
Yeah, we do have a great question, but I do, before I forget, want to say a couple things. One, the DC Superior Court is hosting a series of open houses. There is one on July 12th, specifically for summer interns and summer associates. If you want more information, I will either drop it in the chat or we'll drop it in the follow-up email, but that is specifically for you to go to the courthouse and talk with judges, which is incredibly important. I think particularly to pro bono work, when you walk in and you see a judge that says there is a need and we welcome you. You're not going to get in trouble. No one's going to yell at you if you make a mistake. Our courts are very supportive. And so I encourage you to either attend that or some other opportunity to see a hearing. We do have a question about restorative justice. And it's funny because it will overlap with our criminal law panel, which is coming up next. But I will ask this panel. We have somebody who is doing a research project inspired by the 1941 We Charge Genocide United Nations Bill, which was basically a proposal for reparations and the acknowledgement of racial justice in the US. This person is aspiring to be a reparations lawyer, which I think is fabulous. And so a couple sort of offshoot questions. Do you think there is a field for restorative justice law in the United States? California is working in that area, but this person is hoping to see something in the South. And the question is sort of, do you think that's possible? I will keep this question for the second panel, but I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yes,
Harmony?
Right? Yes is the answer. Yes.
I'm seeing the experts come on, so you should ask in the next panel, like Christina said, but we do a lot of that. I know Jen mentioned the law firm Anti-Racism Alliance, and right now our summer associates are plugging away on research that has to do with like reparations, that has to do with the effect of sort of these, we're looking at like post-Smith pardons and the effect of Jim Crow laws and how we can sort of repair the damage done throughout the nation, particularly looking in Jim Crow states and Jim Crow adjacent states. So I think that we are making some progress in that. I'm excited to hear that you're passionate about that. We need young lawyers coming in and having a new sort of fresh energy about what is possible in that state and what we can ask for and push for. So 100% yes. And I would, if I don't know where you are this summer, but if you can get involved, if you are at a firm or even not, to do research with the law firm Anti-Racism Alliance, we still need people to do that. Feel free to reach out to me, and we have research projects that we're working on, and I can send you some information.
I'll just add one thing. It has happened before in the United States. Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II successfully campaigned and received reparations. So I think always looking back at history and taking lessons from how they went about it, how they advocated for it, is an important first step. And I think it's a great opportunity. I haven't heard about reparations law until recently, so it's exciting.
Thank you all so very much. The last point I will make is when folks say reach out, they mean it in this community. I will say this panel in particular, 100% means it. I appreciate that someone in the chat said they would reach out with an email. I think that's fantastic. If at any point you need to connect with any of our panelists or any of our topics, please email me and I'm happy to make those connections. Thank you so much to our panel. This was an incredible conversation. Thank you to the audience for such wonderful questions. We are going to take a break now between this and criminal.